Hey guys, so it's been a little while ever since I uploaded a video here onto YouTube. I think my last YouTube video that I uploaded was my DIY Peter Pan costume, which I uploaded on the 11th of June, I think. But that was a long time ago. That was in the summer. So it's been roughly about 4 to 5 months now of me not uploading. I'm still alive. I'm doing well. Thanks for asking. But I do have an excuse as to why I haven't been uploading here on YouTube. It's not because I lost interest, it's because I actually started working. So, with that being said, I started working and I also started college up again, online college, like online classes. So, with that being said, I've just been on a really bad time crunch and I don't have enough time to do, costume videos or anything like that because costumes take a long time for me to do. And I just have found no time to make a simple costume, let alone film a costume video for YouTube. But since Halloween is just around the corner at the time that I'm recording this video, I decided that I wanted to do a sled cosplay from the Tinkerbell movie, The Secret of the Wings. So for this specific character, I didn't have a lot of images to go off of. I think I only had a total of 3 or 4 images that I was actually using for my initial sketch. I tried to do as much research as I could possibly do, and I also looked to see if anyone else in the world has cosplayed as Sled. And I think I only saw a total of 2 to 3 guys in the world, or at least on Google, that have cosplayed as Sled. But that's good because that actually gave me a couple ideas on how I could potentially morph the costume to my liking. So at least I had those reference photos, and then I had the other reference photos from the movie, and then this photo right here on screen that I could work with and kind of sketch out my own version of the sled cosplay. I do want to state that since this is a proto image or my first initial image of the costume, throughout the duration of this video, you're going to see a lot of things that I either cut out or added into the costume. Like one thing that I ended up cutting out, which you will see in the final sketch, is the light up wing effect. I was thinking of wrapping fairy lights around the wiring of the wings, but I ended up scrapping that out because I felt like it was just a bunch of busy work that I didn't necessarily need to do. And I also felt like it would look weird because it would only be on the border of the wings. So I ended up getting rid of that. And I also ended up adding a lot of other things, which you'll see throughout the duration of this video. And here is the final sketch. So now that I have the sketch done, I needed to go to Joann's and get the fabric that I needed for the costume. And I ended up settling between these two colors right here. The blue one will be the outfit, and then the purple one will be the belt. So when I first thought of making this costume, I told myself specifically that I had a budget of $50 and I would not spend more than $50. Well, I forgot to tell myself one thing. I was going to Joann's. And well, you can't really not spend more than $50 at Joann's. It just doesn't happen. It's like $10 per yard per fabric, which I get. They have high quality fabrics, no complaints there. But I don't do math, and I'm never reasonable. So my budget of $50 ended up going to a budget of $250, which is typical of me to do when it comes to costumes. I don't really know how to save money, but it's perfectly fine because it all evens out because I had a 10% off discount at Joann's. So we're good. Everything's fine. Everything's cool. It wasn't really, actually, it's not cool. I spent like half my paycheck. I also don't know why I took 2 separate clips of me throwing the fabric onto the ground. I think I was trying to be aesthetic, but I'm never aesthetic. I just do me. So I don't know, but enjoy. I guess I need some more clip fillers because I talk a lot. And just like with any of the previous costumes that I've done in the past, all I did was I simply took a shirt that has a good fit around my body and I used it to sketch out the side seams and also the shoulder seams of the costume. For my specific costume, I decided to leave a total of about 18 to 20 inches hanging from the very bottom of the shirt due to the fact that in a couple clips from now, I need to cut out this like weird slanted triangle piece that goes on the bottom of the costume. So to help me not mess up too much, I decided to just simply elongate the shirt and that will help me kind of create a better pattern rather than having to go back and redo the pattern because I either cut it too short or whatever the case is. So if you are going to make this costume, which I highly doubt anyone is, just remember to leave a couple inches on the very bottom so when you cut out the triangle, it makes it a lot easier for you to do so. Then after sketching it out, I simply just cut out the patterns. I actually ended up having a total of 3 of the same pattern. Due to the fact that I was making a robe design, I needed 1 for the back and then 2 for the front. And with that being said, here are the 3 shirt patterns that I ended up having at the end. And per usual, after cutting out the pieces, I simply took them to my ironing board and I gave each piece a quick press. After giving each piece a press, I simply sketched out a design that I was happy with and then cut it out. And I basically did the same thing for the other side of the shirt and also the back of the shirt. I pretty much just did a design that I was happy with, and I also made sure that everything connected together nicely and I didn't have, one side longer than the other. I also made sure that when I sewed the pieces together, everything would line up well. So I just kind of looked at what did look good and what didn't look good, and I just kind of worked from there. And after cutting out the two side pieces, this is how they ended up looking like. So this clip right here shows you how I cut out the back piece. So what I did was after cutting out the side pieces, I aligned it with my back piece and then simply drew out a slanted triangle on the back connecting both of these side pieces together, and then I cut it out. After cutting out the pieces, I actually ended up roughly pinning the pieces together and then trying it on just in case there were any mistakes that I needed to correct. And after seeing that there were absolutely no problems to be fixed, I got started on the lining of the costume. So I ended up using this extra spare white cotton fabric that I had laying around. And what I did was I unpinned the pieces and then pinned them face down on this cotton fabric, and then I used it as the lining for my costume. So if you for some reason want a little bit more of an in-depth explanation on how I non-professionally line my costumes and outfits, be sure to check out the two previous videos that I've posted here on my YouTube channel. Those two videos will dive a little bit more into how I actually do it. For this video specifically, since it's my third video, I'm not necessarily going to dive into it too much. I'm still going to show you guys the process and explain a little bit, but not as much as I have done in the two previous videos that I've posted here on my channel. But anyways, after pinning the pieces together, I simply took it to my sewing machine and did a basic straight stitch all around the circumference of the actual pieces, making sure to leave a small gap somewhere, preferably like the arm or the neck area, so that you can actually flip it inside out. After sewing the pieces onto my lining fabric, I trimmed off the excess of the lining fabric and then flipped it inside out, repeating that process for all three of the pieces of the top of the costume. And after vigorously doing that step 3 times, this is how they ended up turning out. Next, I made the sleeves for the costume by simply folding a piece of fabric in half and then cutting out a slanted triangle. So to put it into simpler terms, I basically just copied the same sleeve pattern that I did for my Peter Pan costume and replicated it for this costume. And after cutting out two identical sleeve patterns, I took them and pinned them on top of my white fabric and then sewed them down using my sewing machine, remembering to leave a little bit of space so that you can be able to flip them inside out. And after that, I attached them to my costume. So since the original costume in the movie had a collar on it, the next step that I did was I took my tape measure and I measured out how long I needed the collar to be. This step is pretty much very similar to how I made the sleeves for the costume, so I'm not going to dive into it too much, but basically after doing the usual, I just attached it onto my costume. And after attaching the collar onto my costume, I was pretty much done with the top portion of the costume, so the next thing that I needed to get started on was the belt. For the belt, it's pretty easy to explain, so all I did was I took my tape measure and I measured out my waist, and then I cut a huge strip of fabric according to what size I needed. After cutting out the huge strip of fabric and also making sure that it fit around my waist properly, I folded it in half and I sketched out a sort of leaf pattern and then cut it out. Next, I took my belt and then I pinned it on top of my shimmery purple fabric, therefore making the lavender cotton fabric the back side of the belt, and then the shimmery fabric that I have right here the front side of the belt. And after pinning and sewing down the belt, I flipped it inside out, and I also did a basic straight stitch all around the border of the belt to kind of make it look a little bit more professional. And then after that, I attached Velcro to the opposing sides, and I was basically finished with the belt. And here is a clip of me trying on the pieces that I've finished so far. I also forgot to mention earlier that I did attach Velcro onto the costume. I was kind of expecting the belt to kind of help keep the costume in place, but it wasn't doing a good job, so I ended up attaching Velcro and it ended up helping me a lot. The next step that I needed to do was to make the pants for the costume. I originally didn't want to make pants for the costume, but I ended up kind of thinking about it and it wouldn't really look good without the pants, so I just said screw it and I ended up making the pants. For some reason, I always think that making pants is like one of the hardest things to do for me when it's actually not. I think it's because I barely make them that it makes it seem harder than it is. But anyways, how I made the pants was I folded a long piece of fabric in half, and then I took these old gray sweatpants that I had and used them as the pattern for the pants. And then after sketching it out, I simply just cut it out. I also replicated the same design that I've been doing all around the costume for the bottom portion of the pants. The next step, just like before, is to take the patterns and then pin them onto the white fabric and then stitch them down using my sewing machine. After pinning and sewing each of the pieces down, I flipped them inside out and attached them together. And after sewing the pieces together, I folded about 3 to 4 inches from the top of the pants to act as my waistband. So for the waistband, all I did was I sewed a basic straight stitch, making sure to leave an opening somewhere, preferably in the back, so that I can be able to put an elastic band through it. So in regards to the elastic band, how I did this was I took a measurement of my waist, and then from that measurement, I cut it out using my elastic band. However, I did cut it down a tiny bit shorter than I needed so that the waistband would be tighter around my waist. After cutting out the elastic, I attached a safety pin to it and then wedged it all the way into my waistband. Then I attached both of the elastics together and then sewed the opening shut. And here's how the waistband ended up turning out. One of the last things I needed to do for this costume was to make the fairy wings. So I do have to state, prior to this video, I don't have any knowledge or I've never done or made anything similar to fairy wings. So I guess you could say that this is a first for me, which it is. Now, I do know that there's like a huge subculture of people that specialize in only making fairy wings, and I ended up finding that out due to me constantly searching up how to make fairy wings for this video. So I guess what I'm trying to say is do note that this is my first time making fairy wings, so if it looks horrible, don't hate on me, please. But anyways, now on to how I actually made the fairy wings. I ended up buying 3 separate rolls of this silver wire, which was really easy to bend when you have tools. When you're working with like points and stuff, you're gonna kind of need tools so that you don't risk hurting yourself. But I basically just used some needle nose pliers and then some, is that called pliers too? The thing that you actually cut the wires with, because I don't want to break my scissors. So I initially didn't even take any measurements for the wings. I just knew that I wanted them to look huge when I was wearing them. So what I did was I just cut out a huge strip of the wire and then I just basically shaped it or bent it into the shape that I wanted for the wings. And then I replicated that for the other side, and I also did that for the bottom portion of the wings. When it came to the pointed ends, I trimmed them down and also folded them down so that they don't poke me or risk poking me. And then I basically just twisted them together in the middle as you are seeing in this clip right here. And here is how the initial frame of the wings ended up looking like. So I actually ended up running into a lot of problems when actually making the wings. As I stated before, this was my first time making fairy wings, so I was obviously experimenting with different techniques as well as taking inspiration from the various YouTube videos that I watched beforehand. But the mistake that I ended up making for this part of the video was that I ended up using pantyhose. So I distinctly remember watching this one YouTube video where this person ended up using pantyhose for the actual netting of the wings. In my case, it would have worked out if I used a stronger type of wire. So my wire ended up being a little too bendy for its liking, so it ended up not working. Did I actually drop that? I don't even remember dropping that. But yeah, it ended up being too flimsy, and the pantyhose just ended up bringing the wire and bending it together, and it just didn't look good. It just basically, it didn't even look like wings. So in my case, using pantyhose was not the way to go, and I needed to find a different solution. So the following day, I went to Walmart and I bought this organza fabric. My general idea was to sketch out the wings and create something that would be able to fit over it like a sock and then sew it into place. However, the term "you get what you pay for" really applies when it comes to this specific fabric. I believe I only paid $2 per yard, and although the fabric was cheap, I'm paying for a really cheap material. No matter what I did, whenever I sewed the fabric down, it just kept on fraying, and I tried multiple ways to kind of lock everything into place. Not only did I try double stitching it, I also tried zigzag stitching it, I tried burning it with fire, and I also tried using Fabri-Tac glue, but nothing seemed to keep the fabric from actually fraying. It came to the point where I felt like I didn't even have the ability to finish the wings, so I pretty much lost all hope. But a couple days from that initial thought, I decided to give it one more try. I ended up going back to Joann's and purchasing this slightly more expensive fabric. I did pay about $11.64 per yard, which is definitely more than I paid at Walmart. However, comparing the qualities of the two fabrics, the one from Joann's was definitely worth the money. So after I was sure that it was actually going to work out this time, I basically continued on with what I was doing in the first place. So to follow up with that statement, I then took some clear quilting thread and stitched a basic straight stitch all around the circumference of all four parts of the wings to ensure that the organza fabric stays in its place. And after 2 hours of hand stitching, here's how the wings ended up turning out. Following that, I took all four parts of the wings and pieced them together in the middle using a combination of both clear rubber bands and duct tape. So I had a couple ideas when it actually came to how I would wear the wings. My first idea, and the idea that I thought would actually work, was for me to create sort of a backpack with the wings, but that inevitably did not end up working out properly. So after doing some research on how Disney actually has their cast members wear their wings, what I ended up doing was I took some of my leftover wire and I created this triangular piece that would connect to the wings and slot from behind my costume. Along with trying to make the wings look seamless, it's also a lot easier to do compared to any of my previous ideas that I had before. Now, I didn't stop there, and I also ended up making a small pouch for the extension for the wings. I didn't like the sight of the duct tape and the wire showing from behind, so I ended up making this. It was really easy. It only took me about 30 minutes to start and finish it, and along with that, it helps a lot when trying to hide both the duct tape and the wire inside the costume. And as to how I actually wear the wings, what I did was I cut a little slit behind my costume, and that will be able to help me slot the wings into place. Now, at this point, the costume was done. However, in order to give the costume a bit more of a winter feel, I ended up adding some feathered trim to parts of the costume, and this is how it ended up turning out. And here is the finished costume.